The captain passed out in the sky. 189 people were in danger. Then a young girl left her seat, stormed into the cockpit, and took over the plane. The Air Force sent F-22 jets to stop her. They looked inside and asked 3 words. Who are you? Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Tuesday morning, November 7, 2024. Boston Logan International Airport was slowly waking up. The sky outside the wide glass windows was painted in soft shades of orange and pink, the early sun rising over the cold Atlantic Ocean. Inside the terminal, the air smelled like fresh coffee and jet fuel. People shuffled through the wide hallways with rolling suitcases, paper cups of hot coffee in their hands, eyes still heavy with sleep. Gate agents yawned behind their counters. A child cried somewhere near the bathrooms. A businessman talked loudly on his phone about a meeting in Los Angeles. It was a completely normal Tuesday morning. At Gate B32, a group of about 200 people stood in a messy line, waiting to board JetBlue Flight 1776 to Los Angeles. The aircraft was an Airbus A321, a long silver tube with blue and white colors painted on its tail. It would carry 189 passengers from Boston to LA in about 6 hours. A routine flight. A Tuesday flight. The kind of flight that nobody remembers because nothing interesting happens. But something very interesting was about to happen. Among the people shuffling toward the gate door, there was a young woman who was easy to notice but also somehow easy to forget. She was maybe 5 feet and 6 inches tall, with an athletic build and sharp Asian features. She had high cheekbones and intense dark eyes behind black-rimmed glasses. Her long black hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she had actually stuck a pencil through her hair tie to hold it in place. She was wearing a faded crimson MIT hoodie that looked like it had been washed 100 times, black leggings, and beat-up white Converse sneakers with fraying edges. Her backpack was absolutely covered in stickers. NASA, SpaceX, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Northrop Grumman. Any aerospace company you could think of probably had a sticker somewhere on that backpack. And over her shoulder she carried a worn brown leather messenger bag. Written on the flap of the bag in black Sharpie marker were 2 equations: lift equals 1/2 rho v superscript 2s, cl, and drag equals 1/2 rho v superscript 2s, cd. She had written formulas on her bag like other people write their names. She walked through the boarding process like a person whose body was present but whose mind was somewhere completely different. She barely looked at the gate agent who scanned her ticket. She almost tripped over the foot of a man sitting near the gate door. She mumbled a quiet sorry without looking at him. Once she was inside the aircraft and found her row, she had to tap the shoulder of the businessman sitting in seat 9E to ask him to stand up so she could squeeze past him to reach seat 9F, the window seat. He stood up with a polite smile. She didn't return the smile. She just slid past him, sat down, pulled a laptop out of her bag, opened it, and started typing before the businessman had even sat back down. Her name was Kai Zhang. She was 22 years old. The businessman glanced at her laptop screen once. He saw complex 3-dimensional models of aircraft parts, graphs with labels like boundary layer separation analysis, long columns of mathematical equations, and colorful charts that made absolutely no sense to him. He thought, MIT student. Engineering project. Probably an all-nighter. Then he put in his earbuds, opened a movie on his iPad, and forgot about her completely. Everyone else on the plane did the same. They glanced at her, registered her as a young tech student from Boston heading to California, and then moved on with their own thoughts. She was exactly the kind of passenger you see on every Boston to LA flight. Young. Engineering type. Intense. Nothing unusual. Which meant nobody had any idea who she really was. The man sitting in seat 14C, about 2 rows behind her and across the aisle, noticed her exactly twice. Once when she boarded, when he thought for a brief second, wonder what she's studying. And once about 20 minutes into the flight, when he walked to the bathroom at the back of the plane and passed her row. She was still furiously typing on her laptop, earbuds in, completely in her own world, a half-eaten granola bar on the tray table next to her forgotten coffee cup. He thought nothing of it and walked on. He had no idea that the girl in 9F was about to storm into the cockpit of this aircraft and change everything. Kai Zhang was born in Beijing, China, but her family moved to Boston when she was 4 years old. Her father was a mechanical engineer. Her mother was a professor of mathematics at Boston University. Kai grew up in a house full of books, equations, and arguments about physics. She was reading college-level mathematics textbooks at the age of 12. She started her undergraduate degree at MIT when she was 16, finishing it in just 3 years at age 19 with the highest grades in her class. She was now a doctoral candidate in MIT's Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics, working on a PhD dissertation. The title of her dissertation was, Autonomous Recovery Systems for Commercial Aircraft During Pilot Incapacitation Events Using Real-Time AI-Assisted Flight Control. In simpler words, what happens when a pilot suddenly becomes unable to fly the plane, and how can we save the aircraft and everyone on board? She had chosen this topic for a very personal reason. When Kai was 16 years old, her uncle had died in a plane crash. The investigation afterward determined that the captain had suffered a sudden medical emergency and lost consciousness mid-flight. The first officer had been overwhelmed. The aircraft had gone down in a remote area. There were no survivors. Kai had sat in her room for 3 days after the funeral, staring at the ceiling, feeling something that was not just grief but also a burning, furious question: why did nobody know how to fix this? Why wasn't there a better system? Why did people have to die just because one pilot got sick? She decided she would fix it. She was 16. She meant it completely. For the past 3 years, Kai had been obsessively studying every recorded case of pilot incapacitation in commercial aviation history. She had memorized the flight operation manuals for the Boeing 737, the Airbus A320, the Airbus A321, and the Boeing 777. She had built computer programs that could detect signs of pilot incapacitation through monitoring systems. And her dissertation advisor, Professor Richard Morrison, a former United States Air Force test pilot who had spent 20 years flying experimental aircraft before becoming a professor at MIT, had recognized Kai as one of the most talented students he had ever taught. Professor Morrison had done something that was technically against MIT regulations. After hours, when the engineering building was mostly empty, he had been letting Kai practice on a Boeing 737 flight simulator that MIT used for research purposes. For a year and a half, Kai had spent 2 or 3 evenings per week in that simulator, running emergency scenarios over and over again. Engine failures. Electrical system failures. Hydraulic failures. And most importantly, pilot incapacitation scenarios, where the simulation would suddenly make the pilot's controls go dead to represent a captain who had collapsed, leaving the student to figure out how to land the plane alone. She had logged 147 hours in that simulator. She had never once crashed. Today, she was flying to Los Angeles because she had been invited to present her research at the Pacific Aerospace Engineering Conference, one of the most important events in her field. She had been working on her presentation slides for the past 3 weeks. She was nervous. More nervous than she wanted to admit. This presentation could define her career. The right people would be in that audience. If she impressed them, her research would get funding. If she failed to impress them, her work might be ignored for years. So she was typing furiously on her laptop, refining her slides, checking her data one more time, muttering equations under her breath in a mixture of English and Mandarin that was honestly a little difficult to follow even if you spoke both languages. Her mind was completely inside the problem she was working on. The Airbus A321 lifted off from Boston Logan at 7:10 a.m., climbing smoothly into the clear November sky and banking west toward California. Most passengers leaned back in their seats and tried to sleep or watch movies on the tiny screens. Flight attendants began the safety demonstration that nobody watches. The businessman in 9E opened his laptop and started answering emails. In seat 9F, Kai Zhang didn't look up from her screen even once. She had absolutely no idea what was waiting for her at 39,000 feet over Pennsylvania. In the cockpit of JetBlue Flight 1776, everything was completely ordinary. Captain Michael Rodriguez was 58 years old and had been flying commercial aircraft for 34 years. He had 26,000 hours of flying time, which means that if you added up every hour he had ever spent in the air, it would add up to almost 3 years of continuous flight. He had flown through thunderstorms, mechanical failures, and passenger medical emergencies. He was calm, experienced, and professional. His last FAA medical examination, just 6 weeks before this flight, had shown him to be in excellent health for his age. First Officer Lisa Chen was 34 years old and had been flying with JetBlue for 9 years. She had 7,200 hours of flying time. She was competent and careful, exactly the kind of co-pilot you want sitting next to you. She and Captain Rodriguez had flown together many times before and had a comfortable, easy working relationship. At 8:45 in the morning, the aircraft was cruising smoothly at 39,000 feet over central Pennsylvania. The autopilot was engaged. The sky was clear. New York Center, the air traffic control facility handling them at that moment, had given them no unusual instructions. Rodriguez and Chen were talking quietly about whether the Philadelphia Eagles had a chance at the playoffs this season. "I'm telling you, their defense is too weak," Rodriguez said, leaning back slightly in his seat. "They can score all they want, but if you can't stop the other team." He stopped mid-sentence. Chen looked at him. "Mike?" Rodriguez's face had gone pale. A gray, waxy kind of pale that was wrong and frightening. His hand went to his chest. He was breathing in short, shallow gasps. "I feel." He started, and his voice sounded strange and far away. "Chest, there's something wrong with my..." He slumped forward over his controls, unconscious. "Mike." Chen grabbed his shoulder and shook him. He didn't respond. She could see his chest rising and falling very shallowly. He was breathing, but barely, and he was completely unresponsive. She checked his pulse with 2 fingers on his neck. It was weak and fast. What had happened to Captain Rodriguez was a massive pulmonary embolism. A blood clot, which had been silently forming in his legs over the past several weeks without any symptoms, had broken loose and traveled through his bloodstream to his lungs. It blocked the blood flow through his pulmonary artery, causing sudden, severe chest pain and, within about 45 seconds, complete loss of consciousness. It was a medical emergency that could kill him within minutes without treatment. But right now, Lisa Chen did not know any of that. All she knew was that her captain had just collapsed, possibly dying, and she was alone at the controls of an Airbus A321 carrying 189 people. She took a breath. One breath. Then she did exactly what she had been trained to do. She took over the controls, deactivated the autopilot to manual control, and keyed her microphone. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. JetBlue 1776, Captain incapacitated, requesting immediate clearance to nearest suitable airport." The response from New York Center came back within seconds. The controller's voice was steady and calm, the professional calm of someone who had trained for exactly this situation. "JetBlue 1776, New York Center, we read your mayday. Turn left heading 270. Nearest suitable airport is Philadelphia International, approximately 90 miles. Descend to flight level 240. Emergency services will be notified and standing by on arrival. You are priority traffic. JetBlue 1776, left 270, descending to flight level 240. Philadelphia." Chen's voice was steady. "Good." She was holding it together. She began the emergency descent. The nose of the aircraft tilted gently downward. Passengers in the cabin felt the slight change in pitch and looked up from their movies and naps with confused expressions. In the cabin, the senior flight attendant, a woman named Maria, picked up the intercom handset. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your lead flight attendant. We are making an unscheduled stop in Philadelphia. We apologize for the inconvenience. If there is a doctor or any medical professional on board, please identify yourself to a flight attendant immediately. Thank you." Several passengers immediately began asking questions. A few started looking around anxiously. A child in the back started crying. The businessman in 9E took out his earbuds and looked around with a worried frown. In seat 9F, Kai Zhang pulled out her earbuds. She sat very still for a moment. Her eyes went to the window. The plane was descending. She could feel it in her body, the slight change in the forces pressing on her in her seat, the way the engine sound had changed very slightly. She looked at her laptop screen for a moment, then closed it. She listened. She actually listened to the aircraft. Not in the way a nervous passenger listens, trying to figure out if that sound is normal or not. She listened the way a doctor listens to a patient's heartbeat, trained and precise, reading information in the sounds. She felt the vibrations through her seat cushion. She analyzed the engine tone. She processed the angle of descent and the G-forces. She heard Maria's announcement about a doctor. Emergency descent. Request for a doctor. Change in flight path. Her brain processed all of it in about 3 seconds and arrived at a conclusion as clear and certain as a mathematical proof. Pilot incapacitation event. A captain down. A first officer alone at the controls. 189 passengers. 90 miles from Philadelphia. This was not a theoretical scenario in a textbook. This was not a simulation running on a computer in an MIT basement at 11 o'clock at night. This was real, and it was happening right now, around her, and she was sitting in seat 9F doing nothing. She knew what happened to solo pilots during this kind of emergency. She had studied it exhaustively. She had read hundreds of accident investigation reports, interviewed pilots, analyzed performance data. She knew that when a first officer suddenly found themselves alone with a medical emergency in the cockpit, their cognitive load, meaning the amount of mental work their brain was trying to do at one time, went through the roof. Running checklists. Flying the aircraft. Communicating with air traffic control. Monitoring systems. Dealing with the emotional shock of seeing their captain collapse. All of it at once. Human brains had limits. Even well-trained ones. Especially under extreme stress. And she knew something else. She knew the Airbus A321. She had read its entire flight operations manual. Twice. The first time as research for her dissertation. The second time because she was honestly just curious about the details and couldn't stop reading. She could close her eyes and describe the layout of the cockpit instrument panels. She could walk through any system malfunction procedure from memory. She also knew that she had absolutely no authority to do what she was about to do. She was a civilian passenger. She had no official credentials as a pilot. Entering the cockpit of a commercial aircraft without authorization was a federal crime. She was 22 years old and wearing a sweatshirt with a pencil in her hair. None of that mattered. She unclipped her seatbelt, stood up, grabbed her laptop and messenger bag, and walked forward toward the front of the aircraft. The senior flight attendant, Maria, was walking quickly down the aisle toward the back of the plane when she nearly ran into Kai coming the other way. Maria was a tall woman in her 40s with the organized, efficient manner of someone who had handled dozens of emergencies and knew her procedures cold. "Ma'am, please sit down immediately. We are in an emergency situation, Anne." Kai stopped and looked directly at Maria. The intensity in her dark eyes, behind those black-rimmed glasses, made Maria stop speaking mid-sentence. "Listen to me carefully," Kai said. Her voice was quiet but extremely precise, like a scalpel. There was no trembling in it. No uncertainty. I am a doctoral candidate at MIT in aerospace engineering. My research specialization is pilot incapacitation recovery systems. I have spent 3 years studying exactly this type of emergency, and I have 147 hours of simulator training running scenarios like the one happening in that cockpit right now. Your first officer is alone, terrified, and operating under maximum cognitive load. I know this aircraft's systems. I can take secondary tasks off her hands so she can focus on flying. You can let me into that cockpit and give your crew real assistance, or you can send me back to my seat and let that first officer handle everything completely alone and hope she doesn't miss something critical because she is scared and overwhelmed. That is your choice. I am giving you 5 seconds to make it. Maria stared at her. The flight attendant had been working commercial flights for 17 years. She had seen passengers try to rush the cockpit before, drunk passengers, angry passengers, mentally unstable passengers. Those people looked wild, frightened, aggressive in a dangerous way. This girl looked nothing like any of those people. She looked like someone who was solving a problem. She looked like the calmest person on the aircraft. Something in Kai's voice, the total absence of doubt, the technical precision of every word, the fact that she had used the correct terminology, the fact that she had diagnosed the situation exactly correctly without being told anything, made Maria make a decision she would later say felt less like a choice and more like recognizing an obvious truth. She stepped aside. Kai walked past her to the cockpit door and knocked firmly. First Officer Chen, my name is Kai Zhang, I'm a passenger, I am a trained aerospace engineer with expertise in pilot incapacitation scenarios. I need to speak with you immediately. There was a pause. Then Chen's voice came through the door, tense and sharp. Who are you? Stay back from this door. My name is Kai Zhang, I'm a doctoral candidate at MIT in aeronautics. Please open the door. I can help you. Another pause. Kai heard Chen's voice on the radio, talking to Philadelphia Approach Control. Then the cockpit door opened. Lisa Chen was 34 years old, and on the best day of her life she was an extremely competent, professional, precise first officer. This was not the best day of her life. Her captain was unconscious in the seat next to her, slumped forward, his breathing shallow and ragged. She had been flying the aircraft, managing the radio, running through her emergency procedures, and trying not to think about the fact that she was completely alone in this cockpit. When the door opened and she saw a young Asian woman in an MIT sweatshirt holding a laptop, her reaction was immediate and furious. Who the hell are you? Get out of my cockpit. Kai stepped inside and began talking before Chen could say anything else, speaking very fast in a voice that was like a machine firing information. I'm Kai Zhang, MIT doctoral candidate. My dissertation is on pilot incapacitation recovery systems. I've logged 147 simulator hours including this exact scenario. I've memorized the A321 flight operations manual. I know this aircraft's systems completely. I am not here to fly, I am here to take secondary tasks off your cognitive load so you can focus on flying, which is the single most important thing you need to do right now. You are currently task-saturated and you are approaching the most demanding phase of this emergency, which is the approach and landing. I can monitor systems, run checklists, do calculations, manage secondary radio communications, monitor the captain's vitals. I can do all of it, and you know you need the help, so tell me to get out or tell me to sit down, but decide right now because we are wasting time and altitude. Chen stared at this girl who had just fired an entire paragraph at her without appearing to breathe. Her first instinct was to order her out. But she was 34 years old and she had been flying long enough to know the difference between someone who was faking competence and someone who actually had it. The words were too specific. The terminology was exact. The diagnosis of her situation, task-saturated, cognitive overload, most demanding phase ahead, was precisely correct. And she was alone. And terrified. And she needed help. You know A321 systems? Chen asked. I know them better than most people who fly this aircraft, Kai said. I memorized the manual. All of it. Chen took 1 second. Just one. Then, sit in the jump seat. Monitor systems. Call out any anomalies. Run the emergency landing checklist. Talk to me constantly. Done, Kai said, and sat down. The jump seat in an Airbus A321 cockpit is a small fold-down seat behind and between the two pilot seats, used by check pilots or supervisors who fly along to observe. It was not designed for unauthorized MIT students with laptops, but Kai settled into it with complete calm and opened her computer. What appeared on her screen made the situation significantly more complicated from a legal standpoint. Kai had, over the past 2 years, built her own flight monitoring software as part of her dissertation research. It was designed to interface with aircraft data systems and display real-time information about every major system on the aircraft. It was absolutely not legal for a civilian to run this software on a personal laptop while connected to a commercial aircraft's data network. Kai was aware of this. She did not care at all, not even slightly, because 189 people were on this aircraft and the law could wait. She pulled up the system status display, ran a quick diagnostic across all major systems, and began talking. Systems check complete. Engine 1 and Engine 2 are operating at nominal parameters. Hydraulic systems A and B are green. Electrical systems are nominal. Fuel balance is within limits. Cabin pressure is stable, decreasing at appropriate rate for emergency descent. No hydraulic, electrical, or fuel anomalies detected. Current altitude 31,000 feet descending. Distance to Philadelphia International 78 miles. Estimated time to landing at current descent rate approximately 16 minutes. Captain Rodriguez, pulse is present but weak, approximately 105 beats per minute. He needs immediate cardiac care on landing. Chen turned her head for just a fraction of a second to look at this girl. Then she turned back to the instruments. What's our approach speed? Chen asked. Airbus A321, current weight approximately 68 tons based on fuel load, approach speed should be 145 knots, reference speed for landing flap configuration is 142 knots. Philadelphia runway 19 left is 10,500 feet long, we will need approximately 7,200 feet for a normal stopping distance with auto brake medium, giving us over 3,000 feet of margin. Wind is currently from the south at approximately 8 knots based on the ATIS I'm reading, which will give us a slight headwind component on 19L, which is favorable. You got all that from your laptop? Yes. What do you need me to do next? Run the captain incapacitation checklist. Kai opened the correct page without hesitation and began reading through it clearly and methodically while Chen responded to each item with the appropriate action or confirmation. They worked through it together in under 2 minutes, a procedure that normally required 2 trained pilots. It went smoothly because Kai knew exactly what she was doing. For the next 15 minutes, while Lisa Chen flew the Airbus A321 toward Philadelphia with the steady, careful hands of a trained professional, Kai Zhang sat in the jump seat and handled everything else. She called out altitude and speed changes. She ran the approach checklists. She calculated landing data and confirmed approach parameters. She monitored the captain's breathing. She listened to the communications between Chen and Philadelphia approach control and flagged relevant information. She ran the weather update for Philadelphia and confirmed runway conditions. She reminded Chen of checklist items before Chen had to think of them. Chen had been flying for 9 years. She knew when someone was genuinely competent and when someone was pretending. This girl was not pretending. She was extraordinary. She processed information faster than anyone Chen had ever worked with in a cockpit, called out exactly the right things at exactly the right moments, and did all of it in a voice so calm and precise that it was almost mechanical. Not emotionless, exactly. Focused. The way an expert surgeon is focused. Not detached from the situation but completely in command of their own reaction to it. Altitude 22,000, Kai called out. On profile for Philadelphia approach. All systems normal. We are looking good. Thank you, Chen said quietly. Don't thank me yet. We're not down. At Langley Air Force Base in Hampton, Virginia, an alert went out at 8:52 in the morning. Commercial aircraft JetBlue 1776, transmitting Mayday, captain incapacitated, declaring emergency, routing to Philadelphia International Airport. Standard protocol for any commercial aircraft emergency occurring near the Washington, D.C. airspace corridor required the scramble of fighter escorts. This was automatic. It happened without anyone having to make a special decision. Two F-22 Raptor fighters, the most advanced air superiority aircraft in the world, launched from Langley within minutes. The pilots were Major Tyler Morrison, call sign Viper, 11 years of fighter experience, and Captain Sarah Hayes, call sign Reaper, 8 years of experience. Their orders were standard: intercept JetBlue 1776, establish visual contact, assess the situation, and escort the aircraft to Philadelphia if necessary. The F-22 Raptor can fly at speeds exceeding Mach 1.5. It reached the A321 in minutes. Viper pulled his Raptor into a tight formation alongside the left side of the Airbus A321 and used his targeting pod, a sophisticated sensor system that could zoom in and produce a remarkably clear image of objects at significant distances, to look into the cockpit of the commercial aircraft. He saw First Officer Chen at the controls. He saw Captain Rodriguez slumped in his seat, clearly incapacitated. And then he saw something that made him look twice, lean forward slightly in his cockpit, and look a third time to make absolutely sure he was seeing what he thought he was seeing. In the jump seat behind the pilots, there was a young woman. She appeared to be in her early 20s. She was wearing civilian clothes, a crimson hoodie. She had a laptop computer open on her knees. She was typing on it. She appeared to be reading data from the screen and speaking to the first officer. She was clearly operating electronic equipment inside the cockpit of this aircraft. Viper keyed his radio to his command frequency. Langley Control, Viper 1. We have visual on JetBlue 1776. Be advised, there appears to be an unauthorized individual in the cockpit. Young female, civilian clothing, operating a laptop computer. Repeat, unauthorized civilian in the cockpit with active electronic equipment. Requesting guidance. The response from Langley was immediate. Viper 1, Langley Control. Stand by. Confirming identity. In the cockpit of the A321, Kai Zhang was monitoring multiple radio frequencies on her laptop. This was, like nearly everything else she was currently doing, technically illegal. She heard Viper's transmission clearly through her headphones. She reached past Chen's shoulder and grabbed the radio transmit button before Chen could stop her. Viper 1, this is Kai Zhang, aerospace engineering doctoral candidate at MIT. I am a passenger on JetBlue 1776. I am assisting the first officer with systems management during a pilot incapacitation emergency. I am not a threat. I am not hostile. My laptop is running flight system monitoring software to support the first officer. You can verify my identity through MIT's Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics. Ask for Professor Richard Morrison. He is a former United States Air Force test pilot and he will vouch for my training and credentials. I understand your concern. I would ask that you trust that we have this situation under control and allow us to focus on landing this aircraft. Kai Zhang out. There was a silence on the frequency that lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Viper's voice came back, and it had changed. The professional military crispness was still there, but underneath it was something that sounded a lot like genuine surprise. MIT student, who are you? How are you in that cockpit? How do you know our protocols? And how in the world are you this calm right now? Kai did not roll her eyes, because she was professional, but she came very close. She keyed the radio again. I am calm, Major, because I have trained for this specific scenario for 3 years and I know exactly what I am doing. You are the ones who should be calm, because you are just watching from outside. We are the ones landing a crippled aircraft. Now with respect, I have systems to monitor and checklists to run, and I would appreciate it if you would allow us to focus. I will see you on the ground. Kai out. She switched back to the approach frequency. Inside his F-22 cockpit, Viper sat in silence for a moment. Beside him, in her own Raptor, Captain Sarah Hayes keyed their private frequency. Did that college student just dismiss us? Yeah, Viper said. There was a long pause. I think I'm kind of impressed. Me too, honestly. They settled into formation on either side of the Airbus A321 and watched as it descended toward Philadelphia, escorted by two of the most powerful fighter jets on the planet, its fate resting significantly in the hands of a 22-year-old in a faded MIT hoodie. JetBlue 1776, Philadelphia approach, you are cleared for ILS approach to runway 19er left. Wind 170 at 8, altimeter 299er2. Emergency equipment is standing by. JetBlue 1776, cleared ILS 19er left, Philadelphia. Thank you. Chen's voice was controlled. Good. Altitude 12,000 feet, Kai said immediately. Passing the outer marker in approximately 4 minutes. Checklist Item 1, Approach Briefing, complete. Item 2, Landing Data Card confirmed, VREF 142 knots, landing distance 7,200 feet, runway available 10,500 feet. Item 3, Seatbelt sign, on. Item 4, Cabin crew notified. What is the status of passengers? Chen pressed the intercom. Maria, this is Chen. How is the cabin? Maria's voice came back, slightly strained but professional. Passengers are seated and belted. Some anxiety but controlled. Ready for landing. Thank you, Maria. Checklist continues, Kai said without pausing. Item 5, fuel, balanced. Item 6, passengers seated, confirmed. Beginning approach configuration. Flaps 1, Chen called. Flaps 1 selected, Kai confirmed, checking the indicator on the panel. Flap 1 confirmed. The aircraft was descending smoothly. Philadelphia's skyline was visible in the distance through the cockpit windows, gray buildings under a pale November sky. The Delaware River was a dark silver ribbon below them. 10,000 feet, Kai called. Speed 250 knots, within limits. All systems normal. Gear down in approximately 2 minutes. Engine anti-ice selected, conditions require it. Understood. Chen was flying with complete concentration, hands light on the side stick, eyes moving constantly between the instruments and the view ahead. 8,000 feet. Gear down. Gear down. Chen moved the landing gear lever to the down position. There was the familiar rumble and thump of the gear extending, and 3 green lights appeared on the panel. 3 green lights confirmed, Kai said. Gear down and locked. Flaps 15. Flaps 15. Flaps 15 confirmed. Speed 185 knots, target 180. Correcting, 3 knots high. Comfortable. They continued down. 5,000 feet. The runway was clearly visible now, a long gray stripe ahead of them with approach lights blinking at its near end. Kai was talking in a continuous stream, calling out altitude, speed, descent rate, checklist items, system status, all of it clear and steady and fast. Outside, the 2 F-22 Raptors were still there, one on each side, watching. Viper had his targeting pod zoomed all the way in on the cockpit. He could see First Officer Chen's face, tight and concentrated, and he could see the girl in the jump seat, this Kai Zhang, whose eyes were moving between her laptop screen and the cockpit instruments with a speed and precision that was extraordinary to watch. She is actually doing it, Viper said quietly, to no one in particular. She's amazing, Reaper said. 5 miles, Kai called. Altitude 3,000 feet. On glide slope, confirmed by ILS. Speed 165 knots, on profile. Flaps 30 for landing. Flaps 30. Flaps 30 confirmed. Final landing configuration complete. Ground spoilers armed, confirmed. Auto brake set to medium, confirmed. All checklists complete. Kai Zhang, landing checklist is done. The aircraft is ready to land. Chen took a breath. Good. Thank you. 3 miles. 1,500 feet. On glide slope. Speed 155 knots. Runway in sight. 2 miles. 1,000 feet. Looking good. Speed 150 knots, slightly fast, check your throttle. Chen made a tiny adjustment. The speed came back to 147 knots. Better. 1.5 miles. 750 feet. Still on glide slope. In the cabin, passengers gripped their armrests. Some were praying. Some were crying quietly. The businessman from 9E had his eyes shut. In his mind he was replaying everything from the morning, the ordinary coffee, the ordinary gate, the ordinary girl in the MIT hoodie, wondering when exactly the ordinary morning had turned into this. 1 mile. 500 feet. Speed 145 knots, right on Vref. You have it, first officer. I have it. 400 feet. 300 feet. The approach lights were flashing past beneath them. The runway threshold was right there. Chen was absolutely focused, hands gentle on the side stick, eyes locked on the runway. 50 feet. Flare. Chen pulled back slightly on the side stick. The nose came up a fraction. The rate of descent slowed. The main landing gear kissed the runway with a firm, solid thump. Not a perfect landing, but a completely safe one. Then the nose gear came down. Thrust reversers. Kai called. Chen deployed the thrust reversers and pressed the brakes. The aircraft decelerated rapidly, the engines roaring in reverse. The runway was passing under them fast and then slower and then much slower and then they were down to taxi speed and then they were stopped. They were on the ground. They were safe. Chen sat in her seat for a moment. She could hear sirens outside already, fire trucks and ambulances rushing toward the aircraft. She could hear the passengers in the cabin making noise, some crying, some cheering. She was holding the controls so tightly that her knuckles were white. She took her hands off the controls very slowly, as if she was afraid everything might collapse if she let go too quickly. Then she turned and looked at Kai Zhang. Kai had closed her laptop. She was sitting in the jump seat with her hands folded on top of it, looking calm and steady, like someone who had just finished a mildly interesting exercise. All systems nominal, Kai said quietly. Captain Rodriguez is still breathing. Paramedics are 30 seconds out. Chen was crying. The tears were running down her face and she wasn't trying to stop them. After what she had just been through, the release was completely appropriate and completely human. Thank you, she said. Her voice cracked. I don't know if I could have done that without you. Kai looked at her for a moment. You could have, she said honestly. You're a good pilot. You had it. But I'm glad I was here. The next 4 hours were extremely chaotic. Paramedics rushed aboard and removed Captain Rodriguez on a stretcher. He was alive. The hospital would later confirm the pulmonary embolism diagnosis and report that he had received treatment in time. He would spend 3 weeks in the hospital and then begin a long recovery. He would eventually make a full return to health, though his flying career was over. The passengers were evacuated from the aircraft in an orderly and reasonably calm manner, which was a small miracle given what they had just been through. Many of them were shaking. Several needed to sit down immediately. A few required medical attention for anxiety and one for chest pain that turned out to be stress-related rather than cardiac. And Kai Zhang was met at the bottom of the jetway by 2 Philadelphia airport security officers and an FBI agent who had arrived very quickly. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." Kai looked at them. "Okay," she said simply, and went with them. The interrogation room was a small, cold, fluorescent-lit room that smelled like old coffee. 2 FBI agents sat across from her. They were professional, polite, and very serious. "Miss Zhang, I need to inform you that by entering the cockpit of a commercial aircraft without authorization, you committed a federal offense under Title 49 of the United States Code. In addition to this, you operated unauthorized electronic equipment connected to the aircraft's data systems, which is a separate federal offense. You also accessed restricted radio frequencies, which is a violation of FCC regulations. You have, to be direct about it, committed multiple serious crimes this morning." Kai sat with her hands folded on the table and looked at the agent calmly. "I saved 189 lives," she said. "You're welcome." "That is not the point, Miss Zhang." "Then what is the point?" "That I should have sat in my seat and watched while First Officer Chen was alone and overwhelmed. That I should have done nothing because my doing something was technically illegal. Is that the argument you're making? The law exists for good reasons. The cockpit is a restricted area because unauthorized people in the cockpit create a security risk. I was not a security risk. I was the opposite of a security risk. I was the most qualified person on that aircraft to be in that cockpit after the 2 pilots, and one of those pilots was unconscious. The rules exist to protect people. I also existed, in that moment, to protect people. I chose to protect people. That is what happened." The FBI agents had no immediate response to this. About 40 minutes into the questioning, the door opened and Professor Richard Morrison walked in. He was in his 60s, white-haired, with the straight posture and steady eyes of someone who had spent decades flying extremely fast aircraft at extremely high altitudes. He was wearing a gray MIT faculty jacket and he looked like someone who was very comfortable in rooms where difficult conversations were happening. "Gentlemen," he said, sitting down beside Kai. "I'm Professor Richard Morrison, MIT Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics. I'm Dr. Zhang's dissertation advisor and I believe I'm also the person the F-22 pilots were told to contact for verification of her credentials." One of the FBI agents looked at Morrison. "Professor, your student violated." "My student," Morrison said, "used the knowledge I helped her develop to prevent what could have been a catastrophic accident. I have flown military aircraft for 20 years. I have been teaching aerospace engineering for 15 more. I have never taught anyone with her level of knowledge, her level of preparation, or her level of composure under pressure. If you want to file charges against her, I suggest you first ask yourself what the alternative outcome would have looked like without her." He paused. "And then I suggest you ask her to tell you exactly what she did and how she did it, because I have a feeling her account will be rather impressive." An hour after Morrison arrived, First Officer Lisa Chen walked into the room. She had been through her own debrief and medical check and was still wearing her uniform. She sat down across from the FBI agents and gave her statement in the clear, direct voice of someone who knew exactly what she had witnessed. Kai Zhang entered the cockpit during a pilot incapacitation emergency. I initially ordered her to leave. She demonstrated specific, accurate, detailed knowledge of the aircraft systems and emergency procedures that I could not have invented or fabricated on the spot. I made a judgment call to accept her assistance. Her assistance was correct, professional, and critical. She ran checklists without error. She called out system status accurately and in real time. She calculated approach speeds and landing distances correctly. She managed communications and secondary tasks that would have significantly increased my cognitive load at the exact moment when my cognitive load was already near maximum. I did not have a co-pilot. She functioned as one, in every meaningful way, within the bounds of what she had stated she would do. She never touched the flight controls. She never gave me unsafe or incorrect information. Without her, I would have been managing this emergency completely alone. I am not saying I would have crashed. I am saying that the margin of safety was substantially larger because she was there. I am recommending she receive a commendation, not prosecution." The FBI agents were quiet for a long time after Chen finished speaking. 2 days later, Major Tyler Morrison, call sign Viper, and Captain Sarah Hayes, call sign Reaper, submitted their official incident reports from the F-22 intercept. Both reports were classified, but later portions would be made public. Both described Kai's radio transmission as demonstrating extraordinary technical knowledge and composure. Both recommended she receive recognition for her actions. Viper's report contained a sentence that would be quoted in approximately 400 news articles over the following weeks. "In 11 years of military aviation, I have never encountered a civilian with this level of technical understanding and operational calm. She was, in the most straightforward terms possible, extraordinary." The FAA investigation took 2 weeks. The finding, released in a formal statement, read, "While Ms. Zhang's entry into the cockpit violated established access protocols, investigation into the circumstances of JetBlue Flight 1776's November 7 emergency landing has found that her actions were consistent with good faith emergency assistance provided under extreme circumstances. Her technical knowledge has been verified by MIT faculty and confirmed by First Officer Chen's testimony. Her actions contributed positively to the safe outcome of the emergency. Given the exceptional and extraordinary nature of the circumstances, no charges will be filed. The FAA is conducting a review of current protocols regarding the potential use of qualified civilian technical experts during declared pilot incapacitation emergencies." No charges. The media coverage was enormous and immediate. Within 24 hours of the landing, Kai Zhang's face was on every major news network in the country and trending on every social media platform in the world. MIT student storms cockpit, saves 189 lives. The girl who took control. 22-year-old engineering student lands plane with Air Force watching. Every newspaper, every website, every television channel wanted to interview her. Kai hated it completely. She gave one brief statement through MIT's communications office, thanked First Officer Chen and the air traffic controllers, declined all interview requests, and went back to working on her presentation slides. She had a conference to attend in Los Angeles and a dissertation to finish. MIT issued a formal statement praising her and noting, carefully and diplomatically, that they were reviewing the policy on after-hours simulator training for doctoral students. JetBlue Airlines sent her a letter offering to pay for her full commercial pilot training, a program that normally costs around $80,000, plus a guaranteed job offer as a first officer upon completion of training and licensing. United Airlines sent a similar letter. Boeing's engineering division offered her a senior engineering position. Several defense contractors reached out through Professor Morrison. Kai's response to all of them was essentially the same: "Thank you. I will finish my PhD first. Then we will talk." She meant it. She went back to her dissertation. 3 months later, she defended it. The committee room at MIT was standing room only. Faculty members, students, and several invited guests packed every available chair and stood along the walls. Outside in the hallway, a dozen journalists waited, which was extremely unusual for a doctoral dissertation defense in aerospace engineering. Kai stood at the front of the room in front of a projected slide that read, "Autonomous Recovery Systems for Commercial Aircraft During Pilot Incapacitation Events, a Framework, Validation Study, and Real-World Case Analysis." She presented her research for 45 minutes. The committee, 5 of the most senior aerospace engineering faculty at MIT, asked technical questions for another 30 minutes. Kai answered every question directly, precisely, and completely. She had anticipated most of the questions. The few she hadn't anticipated, she worked through methodically in real time, arriving at correct answers through obvious and sound reasoning. Then she showed the last section of her presentation. Finally, she said, "I want to present what I believe is the most significant validation study in this dissertation. Not a simulation. Not a laboratory model. A real-world case. She advanced the slide. It showed a flight track over Pennsylvania and the approach to Philadelphia International Airport. On November 7 of this year, I had the opportunity to apply my research framework in a live pilot incapacitation emergency aboard JetBlue Flight 1776. The following data was collected during that event. She showed the data. System monitoring logs. Checklist completion times. Approach speed calculations. Communication transcripts. Reaction time measurements. Everything. She had recorded all of it on her laptop during the event itself. The framework performed as the model predicted, she said. Cognitive load reduction for the primary pilot through secondary task delegation was measurable and significant. The checklist system functioned correctly under real conditions. The approach calculations were accurate to within acceptable margins. 189 people are alive, including Captain Rodriguez, who has begun his recovery. This is the proof of concept. She paused. This system works. I know it works because I used it. The room was completely silent for a moment. Then one of the committee members, a 70-year-old professor who had been teaching aerospace engineering since before some of his colleagues were born, began to clap. The rest of the room joined him immediately. The committee deliberated for exactly 4 minutes. They returned. Ms. Zhang, the committee chair said, "It is our unanimous decision to award you the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Aeronautics and Astronautics. Congratulations, Dr. Zhang." At age 23, Kai Zhang became the youngest PhD graduate in the history of MIT's aerospace program. About 6 months after the landing, there was a meeting at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. It was a classified meeting, attended by only a small number of people. Major Tyler Morrison, Viper, and Captain Sarah Hayes, Reaper, were asked to brief a general officer on the JetBlue 1776 incident. They had written their reports months earlier, but this was a face-to-face debrief, which meant someone higher up had taken a specific interest. The general listened to both pilots describe the intercept, the visual they had gotten of the cockpit, Kai's radio transmission, and their assessment of what they had observed. "What is your overall evaluation of the subject?" the general asked. Viper answered. "General, in 11 years of flying, I have encountered a lot of highly capable people in aviation. I have never seen a civilian demonstrate that level of technical competence combined with that level of operational composure under real emergency pressure. She assessed the situation accurately. She communicated clearly. She performed under extreme stress without any degradation in performance that I could observe. And she did all of this at 22, with no official training beyond a simulator and her academic research." Reaper added, "She dismissed 2 F-22 pilots so she could focus on her job, General. That is not something most experienced officers would do. It shows a level of mission focus that is genuinely rare." The general nodded slowly. Noted. After the meeting, a file was created in a system that did not officially exist. The label on the file read, "Subject, Zhang, Kai, potential recruitment candidate, extraordinary qualification." Nobody told Kai about the file. She was busy finishing her postdoctoral work at MIT, writing 2 more academic papers based on her dissertation research, and seriously considering the job offers that had been sitting on her desk for months. She had, in the end, accepted JetBlue's offer to pay for full pilot training, not because she needed them to pay for it but because she felt she owed JetBlue something after using their aircraft as a dissertation validation experiment without their permission. She completed her commercial pilot training in 14 months. She passed every written exam on her first attempt with perfect or near-perfect scores. Her flight instructors later described her as the most technically prepared student they had ever taught, but noted that her actual stick and rudder flying skills, while excellent, were simply very good rather than supernatural, which reminded them that she was, after all, a human being and not a computer. She got her commercial pilot license. She got her multi-engine rating. She got her instrument rating. She got her ATP, the airline transport pilot certificate required to fly commercially. And then she got a phone call that she had not expected, but, thinking back on it later, she should probably have seen coming. 2 years after JetBlue Flight 1776 landed at Philadelphia International Airport, Dr. Kai Zhang stood on the tarmac at Edwards Air Force Base in California, squinting against the desert sun, looking at an experimental aircraft that had no civilian designation, only a number, and that could fly at speeds and altitudes that had not been publicly acknowledged. She was 25 years old. She was wearing a flight suit. She had, after considerable thought and several very long conversations with Professor Morrison, who had spent 20 years at this same base before becoming a professor, accepted an appointment as a test pilot in the United States Air Force. She had gone through the abbreviated program available to candidates with exceptional prior qualifications. She had been commissioned as an officer. She had completed the test pilot school program in record time with the highest scores in her class. She had been given a call sign. Storm, her flight instructor had announced, on the day she finished her final evaluation flight, in front of the assembled class. Because she stormed into a cockpit and saved 189 lives. Because she told F-22 pilots to get out of her way so she could work. Because when there's a problem in front of her, she doesn't wait for permission. She goes in and fixes it. Dr. Kai Zhang, call sign Storm, looked at the experimental aircraft on the tarmac for a long moment. The aircraft was beautiful in the specific, precise way that only things designed to perform at the very edge of physical possibility are beautiful. It was not glamorous. It was just exactly right. She thought about a Tuesday morning in November, a long time ago, when she had been sitting in seat 9F of an Airbus A321 working on her dissertation slides, and a captain had gotten sick, and she had made a decision that was technically illegal and almost certainly professional suicide and possibly insane. She thought about First Officer Lisa Chen's face when the aircraft stopped on the runway. She thought about the F-22 pilot on the radio, stunned and quiet, asking who she was. She thought about 189 people who had gotten off a plane in Philadelphia and driven home to their families and probably never thought about her at all, which was completely fine. She thought about her uncle. She thought, I fixed it. She put on her helmet, walked to the aircraft, and climbed in. The desert air was very still. Somewhere in the distance, a bird was calling. The kind of quiet that only exists in large empty places, the desert and the ocean and the sky. Kai Zhang checked her instruments with the careful, precise habits of someone who had memorized every system she had ever flown. She ran through her checklist. She confirmed her communications. She taxied to the runway. She applied full throttle. The aircraft lifted off the desert floor and climbed into the perfect blue California sky, accelerating hard, going up and up and up until the desert below was just a pale tan blur and the curve of the earth was faintly visible at the horizon. She was flying. She was Storm. The girl who had stormed into a cockpit wearing a faded MIT hoodie with a pencil stuck in her hair was now a test pilot flying experimental aircraft above the California desert, and she was exactly as aggressive and brilliant and unstoppable as she had always been. She had not saved 189 lives to become famous. She had not stormed a cockpit to be in the news. She had done it because she had spent 6 years studying how to solve a problem, and when the problem appeared in front of her, she solved it. That was who she was. That was all she was. Someone who solved problems. Someone who went toward the thing that needed fixing instead of away from it. The aircraft climbed higher. Dr. Kai Zhang, Storm, age 25, leveled off at altitude and looked out at the enormous sky all around her. Still flying. Still saving lives. Still exceptional. Still, in every possible way that mattered, exactly herself.